Walter Briggs stood at his corner office window, Boston's skyline a testament to his 40 years of relentless work. At 65, the deep lines etching his dark face told a story of determination that transformed a borrowed pickup truck into Briggs Construction, New England's premier development company. "Mr. Briggs, your son is here," his assistant announced through the intercom. Walter straightened his shoulders. Michael's unscheduled visits rarely brought good news. Since Elizabeth's death 3 years ago, the fragile bridge between father and son had collapsed, leaving only professional courtesy where family bonds should have thrived. "Send him in," Walter replied, turning to face the door. Michael entered with calculated confidence. At 32, he possessed Walter's imposing height, but his mother's softer features. The expensive suit he wore, paid for by Walter's decades of sacrifice, seemed to represent everything that separated them. One man who built from nothing, another who inherited everything. "Dad?" Michael nodded, not offering his hand. "We need to discuss the West Shore contract." Walter's chest tightened. West Shore Development was their biggest potential client, a $200 million waterfront project that would cement Briggs Construction's legacy. Walter had spent 2 years cultivating the relationship, attending charity events, golf outings, building trust with old-school handshakes. "What about it?" Walter asked, his voice measured despite mounting concern. "I've reduced our bid by 15% and promised completion 6 months ahead of schedule." The words hung between them like a death sentence. "You did what?" Walter's control slipped. "That timeline is impossible. At that price, we'd barely break even." Michael shrugged. "That's old-school thinking. We'll implement my efficiency systems, use cheaper materials from my overseas contacts. Cut corners? On a project this size?" Walter's voice rose. "That's not how I built this company." "That's exactly the problem," Michael replied, frighteningly calm. "How you built this company. The board agrees it's time for new methods." "My methods." Walter gripped his desk edge. "The board? What are you talking about?" "I called an emergency meeting yesterday. Presented my vision for the company's future. As of this morning, I'm the new CEO of Briggs Construction." The betrayal stole Walter's breath. The board members, people he trusted for decades, some friends he thought loyal to the end. "This is my company," Walter said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I built it from nothing. It's a publicly traded company, Dad. Has been since you needed capital for expansion 15 years ago." Michael's face softened slightly. "You'll retain your shares, of course. Chairman Emeritus status. A generous pension." Walter stood, rage and disbelief battling within him. "You can't do this. It's already done." Michael placed a folder on the desk. "The paperwork is ready for your signature. Security will help you clear out your personal effects." Walter stared at his son, this stranger wearing his blood. "Why?" The question contained 40 years of sacrifice, of missed dinners and school events, of hands torn and bleeding from work that built the comfortable life Michael had always known. "Because you're stuck in the past," Michael replied. "Your methods are obsolete. This company needs to evolve or die." Walter thought of the West Shore project, a corner-cutting disaster waiting to happen. "That bid will destroy everything I've built. You can't deliver quality work at that price in that time frame." "Watch me," Michael said, turning to leave. When the door closed behind his son, Walter collapsed into his chair. For decades of work, thousands of buildings bearing his name across New England, all vulnerable now to his son's reckless ambition. His mind turned to Elizabeth. She'd always defended Michael, always insisted the boy's cutting-edge ideas deserved consideration. Had she known this would happen? Had she seen the snake coiling in their midst? Walter opened his desk drawer and removed a small photo. Himself and Elizabeth on their wedding day, her pregnant with Michael, both faces alight with hope. A future Walter had secured through years of honest work, fair deals, and integrity that never wavered. Now Michael would demolish that legacy in a day. His phone buzzed with a message from Jacob Reynolds, his oldest friend and chief engineer. "Just heard the news. This is wrong. Call me." Walter stared at the phone but couldn't respond. How could he explain that his own son had staged this coup? That the board had turned against him so easily? Outside his window, the Boston skyline sparkled, dotted with buildings bearing the Briggs name, testaments to quality that would soon become monuments to compromise. Walter Briggs had built an empire from nothing. His son had destroyed it in a day. And this was only the beginning. 3 days after his humiliating exit, Walter sat in his Beacon Hill townhouse, study surrounded by photographs chronicling a lifetime of achievement. The bottle of scotch beside him had done little to dull the betrayal's sharp edge or quench the ember of revenge glowing in his chest. He'd bypassed the main entrance that morning, using his key card at the service door where fewer eyes would witness his fall. He wanted to clear his office before the daily bustle began, before sympathetic glances and whispered conversations could follow him through halls he designed himself. Walter had found Michael already seated behind his desk, Walter's desk for 40 years. The photographs and awards that had lined the walls were gone, replaced by minimalist art and digital screens. "Dad," Michael had said, looking up, "I didn't expect you so early." Clearly, Walter remained in the doorway, unable to step into this transformed space. "Where are my things?" Michael gestured to 3 cardboard boxes. "I had your personal items packed. The company memorabilia has been moved to the museum display in the lobby." Museum? As though Briggs Construction's history, Walter's life's work, was already a relic of the past. "You couldn't wait even a day to erase me," Walter said, the words acidic. Michael sighed. "This isn't personal, Dad. It's business evolution. The board approved my rebranding proposal yesterday." He turned a screen toward Walter. The familiar Briggs Construction logo had been replaced by a sleek design reading simply, "Briggs," in angular letters. "Our research shows the word construction limits perception of our capabilities," Michael explained. "We're positioning as a full-service development firm." 40 years of reputation reduced to a sterile corporate logo overnight. "The West Shore contract," Walter said, changing tactics. "You can't possibly deliver what you promised." A flicker of something, doubt, fear, crossed Michael's face before disappearing. "We've already broken ground. Imported materials are en route." Walter approached the desk. "Those materials haven't passed our quality standards." "Dad," Michael's voice hardened, "this is no longer your concern. The transition is complete." The office door opened, and Walter turned to see Thomas Layton, the board's chairman, enter. The silver-haired banker had been Walter's golf partner for 20 years. "Walter," Thomas said, avoiding eye contact, "I thought we might talk. Now you want to talk?" Walter's laugh was hollow. "After you conspired with my son behind my back?" Thomas glanced at Michael. "Perhaps we should speak privately. There's nothing to say that can't be said in front of the company's new CEO." Walter replied, bitter emphasis on the title. Thomas sighed. "The decision wasn't made lightly." Michael presented compelling projections. "The company needs to modernize. Modernize doesn't mean abandon the principles that built our reputation." Walter interrupted. "Quality, integrity, delivering what we promise, not promising what we can't deliver." Walter turned away, moving toward the cardboard boxes containing the remnants of his professional life. He'd expected this confrontation to bring satisfaction, a chance to voice his outrage. Instead, he felt only hollow defeat. As he lifted the first box, his phone buzzed. Walter checked the message. Jacob Reynolds again. "Need to talk urgently. Found serious problems with West Shore Materials. Michael won't listen." Walter glanced at his son. The seed of an idea took root, not just revenge, but salvation. If the West Shore project was compromised, perhaps Walter could still save his company from his son's recklessness. "I'll have these sent to your home," Michael offered, noticing Walter struggling with the box. "Don't bother," Walter replied. "I can manage on my own. I always have." He left with his head high, the first box clutched against his chest, already formulating his next move. Michael might have taken his title, his office, even his company's name, but Walter Briggs still had 40 years of industry connections, knowledge no efficiency system could replicate, and now, a mission to save his legacy from his son's destructive ambition. In the lobby, Walter paused before the newly installed museum display. Among the photographs was one of Walter and 10-year-old Michael at a construction site, both wearing hard hats, the boy beaming with pride beside his father. Walter stared at that frozen moment, wondering where he had lost his son, or where his son had lost himself in the pursuit of a vision that valued efficiency over humanity, profit over principles. The betrayal was complete. But this was not the end. The rain pelted against Walter's study windows as he spread Jacob Reynolds' documents across his desk. 3 days had passed since his exit from Briggs Construction. 3 days of ignored calls from concerned friends and business associates. 3 days of plotting his next move. Jacob had arrived that evening, nervously glancing over his shoulder. The company's chief engineer for 25 years, Jacob had been Walter's right hand through countless projects, a meticulous man who prioritized safety above all. "Michael will fire me when he discovers I've shown you these," Jacob said, pushing a thumb drive and folder across the table. "Then why risk it?" Walter asked, though he already knew the answer. "Because people could die, Walter. The West Shore Materials aren't just substandard, they're dangerous." Now, alone in his study, Walter examined the evidence with mounting horror. The imported steel Michael had source-failed stress tests by alarming margins. The foundation concrete mixture had been diluted to cut costs. The architectural modifications Michael had approved to accelerate construction compromised the building's structural integrity. "My God," Walter whispered to the empty room. The West Shore development, a 30-story luxury condominium complex on reclaimed harbor land, would be catastrophically unsafe under Michael's plan. Not just financially ruinous, but potentially deadly. Walter's phone rang, startling him. Elizabeth's brother, Judge Robert Harrington, returned his call from earlier. "Walter," Robert's deep voice carried the formal cadence of his profession. "I was surprised to hear from you. Elizabeth always said you two were like oil and water." It was true. Walter and his brother-in-law had maintained a polite distance during Elizabeth's life. "I need legal advice, Robert," Walter said, dispensing with pleasantries. "And discretion." Silence stretched across the line before Robert replied. "This is about Michael's takeover?" "Yes and no," Walter explained. "It's about what Michael is doing with the company. Lives are at stake." Walter detailed the West Shore situation, the dangerous materials, the impossible timeline, the corners being cut. Robert listened without interruption. "You're describing criminal negligence at minimum," the judge finally said. "Possibly knowing endangerment. Can it be stopped?" Walter asked. Legally? Robert sighed. You have options, but none without significant collateral damage. To the company. To Michael? I built that company to protect people, not endanger them. Walter's voice cracked. I can't stand by while my name becomes synonymous with cutting corners and risking lives. Then you'll need to be prepared for war, Robert cautioned. Corporate whistleblowers rarely emerge unscathed, even when they're right. And when it's father against son. Walter stared at the photograph on his desk. Elizabeth holding newborn Michael, her eyes shining with love and hope. What would she advise now? Would she still defend their son if she knew what he'd become? I'll send you the name of a lawyer who specializes in these cases, Robert continued. Secure that evidence. It's your only leverage. After ending the call, Walter returned to the documents, his resolve hardening with each page. This wasn't just about reclaiming his company anymore. It was about preventing a disaster that would destroy lives and the Briggs name forever. His doorbell rang, interrupting his thoughts. Walter checked the security camera. Michael stood on his doorstep, rain darkening his expensive suit, his expression unreadable. Walter opened the door. Michael, what brings you here? His son stepped inside, water dripping onto the marble foyer floor. We need to talk, Dad. Walter led him to the living room, deliberately away from the study where Jacob's evidence lay exposed. About what? The complete erasure of my legacy? The danger you're putting innocent people in with your West Shore shortcuts? Michael's eyes narrowed. How do you know about West Shore's materials? I built this business on relationships. People still talk to me. Walter kept his voice steady, revealing nothing about Jacob's visit. That's exactly the problem, Michael snapped. Your old-school network, your resistance to change, your insistence that your way is the only way. When my way prevents buildings from collapsing, then yes, it's the only way, Walter countered. Michael paced the room, agitation evident. I didn't come here to argue about materials. I came to offer you a chance to be part of this transition as a consultant. Your name, your legacy preserved. Walter studied his son's face. Why this sudden concern for my legacy when 3 days ago you couldn't wait to pack my life into cardboard boxes? A flicker of something, guilt, doubt, crossed Michael's features. The board thinks it would ease the transition. Calm nervous investors. So this isn't about respect for what I built. It's about stock prices. It's business, Dad. It's always been business. The statement hung between them like a chasm impossible to bridge. No, Michael. That's where you're wrong, Walter said quietly. It was never just business to me. It was about building something that would outlast me. Something I could be proud to pass on to my son. Michael's expression hardened. Your version of passing it on meant I had to wait until you died before implementing any meaningful change. The Boston Globe headline screamed from newsstands. Briggs construction whistleblower alleges dangerous materials in waterfront project. Walter's lawyer had advised against going public so quickly, but Walter understood something his attorney didn't. The power of reputation in the construction industry was worth more than any legal maneuver. Walter sat in his lawyer's office, watching the fallout unfold on television. The story had exploded overnight, with reporters stationed outside Briggs' headquarters and the West Shore site. The company's stock had plummeted 17% in the first hour of trading. The building inspectors have issued a stop-work order pending investigation, Sarah Donovan, his attorney, reported. Michael has issued a statement calling your claims the desperate actions of a disgruntled former executive unable to accept retirement. Walter winced at the characterization, but wasn't surprised. And the evidence? The city's engineering department is reviewing Jacob's reports now. The paper trail of substituted materials is damning, but Michael's team is spinning this as approved international alternatives rather than substandard products. Walter's phone buzzed. Thomas Layton, the board chairman who had betrayed him. After 4 such calls in the past hour, Walter finally answered. "This isn't the way to handle this, Walter," Thomas began, his voice tight with controlled panic. "You're destroying shareholder value, threatening thousands of jobs." "I'm preventing a catastrophe," Walter interrupted. "Those materials would have failed within 5 years. Probably sooner. Michael has experts who disagree with that assessment. Experts he's paying to say what he wants to hear," Walter countered. "I built this company on safety and quality. I won't watch it become synonymous with negligence and greed." "The board is meeting in an hour," Thomas said after a pause. "What's your endgame here, Walter?" The question hung in the air. What did he want? Revenge against his son? His company back? Or something more fundamental, the preservation of his life's work and the values it represented? "My terms are simple," Walter finally replied. "Michael steps down. The board appoints an interim CEO, not me. The West Shore project continues with proper materials and realistic timelines. And the company name returns to Briggs Construction." "That's substantial," Thomas said cautiously. "It's non-negotiable," Walter replied. "You have until 5 o'clock. 2 hours later, his doorbell rang. Rebecca Chin, a reporter from the Globe who'd broken the whistleblower story, stood on his doorstep with a tablet. "Mr. Briggs, your son has issued some concerning counter-accusations. I wanted to give you the chance to respond." Walter ushered her inside. "What counter-accusations?" Rebecca handed him the tablet. On the screen was a statement from Michael, alongside financial documents Walter recognized. "He's claiming you engaged in systematic bid rigging throughout the 1990s, Rebecca explained. "That Briggs Construction secured government contracts through bribes and political donations. He's provided documentation to both the press and the district attorney's office." Walter stared at the documents, cold dread spreading through him. The records were authentic, a darker chapter of the company's history he'd believed buried decades ago. In the early days, when bankruptcy threatened and competitors played dirty, Walter had made compromises he'd later regretted. "These are selective records," Walter said carefully, "taken out of context from a very different era." "So you're denying the allegations?" Rebecca pressed. Walter had built his second act on honesty and integrity. He wouldn't compound old sins with new lies. "No," he said quietly. "But this happened decades ago. The company, changed course completely by the late 90s. After Rebecca left, Walter called Sarah immediately. "Michael's gone nuclear," he explained. "He's exposed the bid rigging from my early days." Sarah's sharp intake of breath confirmed the seriousness of the situation. "The statute of limitations has likely expired on most of it, but your public image will be destroyed," Walter finished. "He knows that's all I have left." His phone rang again. Jacob Reynolds. "Walter, there's more," his friend said. "I've been going through older projects Michael modified. There's a pattern of material substitutions dating back 18 months, not just West Shore." Walter sank into his armchair. "How many buildings?" 7 completed projects, all showing early stress indicators in my inspections." "My God," Walter whispered. This wasn't just about one project anymore. It was a systematic practice that could endanger thousands. The doorbell rang again. Thomas Layton stood on the doorstep, tie loosened. "The board meeting just ended," he said as Walter let him in. They're backing Michael. The PR team thinks they can weather the West Shore controversy easier than a historical corruption scandal. Walter had expected as much, but the reality still stung. There's something else, Thomas continued, removing an envelope from his jacket. This was in Elizabeth's personal effects stored at the company after she passed. It's addressed to you, to be delivered if Michael ever takes control. Walter accepted the envelope with trembling fingers. Elizabeth had been gone 3 years. What message had she left that could possibly matter now? After Thomas left, Walter opened the envelope and unfolded his late wife's elegant handwriting. Walter, if you're reading this, it means our son has finally outmaneuvered you. I've watched him planning this for years, collecting evidence of your past mistakes. I tried to redirect his ambition. I failed. What you don't know is that Michael's ruthlessness isn't entirely his nature. It's his inheritance not from you, but from me and my family. I'm telling you this because you need to understand, you cannot beat Michael at this game. Not with evidence or public pressure or appeals to conscience. There's only one weakness he cannot overcome, the one truth I made him promise never to reveal. The Harrington blood money that actually saved Briggs Construction in 1998. Not your miraculous contract win, but my family's quiet investment, with funds that came from my father's corruption. I'm sorry, Walter. I kept this from you because I knew your pride couldn't bear it. But now you need this weapon to save our son from himself, even if he hates us both for it. With love always, Elizabeth. The law offices of Harrington, Prescott, and Myers occupied the top floor of a historic Beacon Hill building. Walter sat alone at the massive conference table, surrounded by the trappings of old money power that had always made him uncomfortable, a world of inherited privilege that contrasted sharply with his self-made success. The door opened, and Robert entered, followed by Michael. Walter's son stopped short upon seeing his father, anger flashing across his features. "What is this?" Michael demanded, turning to Robert. "You said this was about Mother's estate." "Sit down, Michael," Robert replied with calm authority. "It is about Elizabeth's legacy, though not in the way you might expect." Michael reluctantly took a seat at the opposite end of the table, maintaining as much distance as possible. "I've asked you both here because it's time to end this mutually assured destruction," Robert began. "Walter has shared Elizabeth's letter with me. Michael, your mother anticipated this conflict years ago." "My mother understood my vision for the company," Michael said defensively. "She supported my plans to modernize what Dad refused to change." "Did she support substituting substandard materials that put people's lives at risk?" Walter asked, unable to contain himself. "Those materials meet international standards." "Gentlemen," Robert interrupted, "we're here because there are facts about Briggs Construction that neither of you fully understands, truths Elizabeth kept hidden to protect you both." Robert removed a thick folder from his briefcase. In 1998, when Briggs Construction was on the verge of bankruptcy after the failed Providence development, it wasn't the Westlake contract that saved the company as you've always believed, Walter. It was a silent investment from the Harrington family, specifically from my father's political fund. Walter nodded slowly. Elizabeth's letter mentioned this. What she didn't explain was why it was kept secret from me. Robert's expression grew grave. Because the money wasn't clean. My father, the respected Senator Harrington, had been accepting bribes for years. Elizabeth knew this. When your company faced ruin, she approached our father without your knowledge. How much money are we talking about?" Michael asked, business instincts engaged despite his anger. $8 million, Robert answered. "Laundered through shell companies and introduced to Briggs Construction as emergency financing from a private investor group. Elizabeth managed the entire process. Walter felt the foundations of his personal history shifting. The miraculous recovery that had launched Briggs Construction into its most successful era had been built on corruption money, the antithesis of the honest business practices he prided himself on. "Why reveal this now?" Michael asked suspiciously. Robert turned to him. "Because your mother made me promise to intervene if you ever used your father's past mistakes against him. She knew you had discovered evidence of his early bid rigging. She's the one who preserved those records, not to use against Walter, but to remind herself that everyone compromises their principles when desperate." Michael's composed facade cracked. "Mom knew about my plans? About the evidence?" "Elizabeth knew everything," Robert confirmed, "including how you've been systematically undermining your father for years, cultivating board relationships, documenting his missteps. She hoped you'd outgrow this obsession with taking control." Walter stared at his son with new understanding. "This wasn't a recent coup. You've been planning this for years." Michael met his father's gaze without flinching. "Since I was 25. Since you dismissed my business plan for digital integration and told me I needed more seasoning before I could contribute meaningfully to the company's future." The revelation struck Walter like a physical blow. 7 years of calculated undermining. 7 years of his son working against him, while smiling across the dinner table. "What neither of you seems to understand," Robert continued, "is that this mutually assured destruction threatens more than your relationship. It threatens the livelihoods of hundreds of employees and potentially the safety of thousands who live and work in Briggs buildings." He opened the folder, revealing documents Walter had never seen: financial records, transfer confirmations, meeting notes in Elizabeth's handwriting. "If either of you continues this public battle, I will be forced to reveal the complete truth about Briggs Construction's financial salvation, including the origin of those funds. The statute of limitations may have expired on Walter's bid rigging, but there is no limitation on the public's memory." The implication hung heavy. Robert was threatening to destroy the company's reputation entirely if this war continued. "What do you want from us?" Walter finally asked. "A compromise," Robert replied. Michael remained CO, but with oversight from an independent board committee on all material and safety decisions. Walter returns as chairman emeritus with veto power over any changes to construction standards. The West Shore project continues with properly vetted materials, even if that means renegotiating the contract at a loss. "And the company name?" Michael asked. "Remains Briggs Construction," Robert said firmly. "The rebranding stops immediately." Walter considered the proposal. It wasn't what he'd wanted. Michael would still have operational control, but it would ensure the company maintained its safety standards. Most importantly, it would prevent people from being harmed by buildings bearing his name. "I can accept those terms," Walter said quietly. All eyes turned to Michael, whose jaw had tightened noticeably. "And if I refuse?" Robert tapped the folder. "Then tomorrow, these documents go to the same reporter who broke your father's story. The headline Briggs Construction built on corruption money would make your current PR problem seem trivial." For the first time since this conflict began, Walter saw uncertainty in his son's eyes, the calculation of a man realizing he'd been outmaneuvered. "Fine," Michael finally said, "but I want it in writing that my authority over operational decisions remains absolute, outside of material and safety standards." "Done," Robert agreed. "I'll have the papers drawn up by tomorrow." 6 months passed like a slow-healing wound. Boston summer heat gave way to autumn, painting the city in fiery colors that reminded Walter of Elizabeth. She had loved this season best, The transformation, she'd say, the visible evidence that change, however painful, could be beautiful. Walter had settled into his role as chairman emeritus with quiet dignity. His modest office at Briggs headquarters, not his former corner suite, but a respectable space nonetheless, had become a pilgrimage site for employees and industry veterans seeking his counsel. The independent oversight committee functioned better than expected, reviewing material selections and safety protocols with rigorous attention. The West Shore project continued under revised specifications. The timeline extended, the budget increased to accommodate proper materials. Michael had managed to retain the client despite the negative publicity, a testament to his persuasive abilities that Walter couldn't help but admire, however grudgingly. Father and son maintained a careful professional distance, interacting only when necessary in meetings, communicating primarily through intermediaries. The Cold War had ended, but peace remained elusive. Until the call came on a Tuesday afternoon. "Mr. Briggs," his assistant said, "there's been an accident at West Shore. Michael is asking for you specifically." Walter's heart seized. "Injuries?" "Minor, they say. A support scaffolding collapsed during inspection. Michael and Jacob were on site." Walter grabbed his coat, already moving toward the door. "I'm on my way." The West Shore site buzzed with emergency vehicles, their lights flashing against the steel and glass of the half-completed structure. Police had established a perimeter, but Walter was waved through immediately, the Briggs name still commanding respect despite recent controversies. He found Michael in the site office, a converted shipping container elevated above the construction zone. His son's normally immaculate appearance was disheveled, suit dusty, a small cut above his eye being tended by a paramedic. Jacob sat nearby, looking shaken but unharmed. Michael looked up as Walter entered, and for a brief moment, something vulnerable crossed his features, something Walter hadn't seen since Michael was a boy awakening from nightmares, calling for his father. "What happened?" Walter asked, addressing both men. Jacob answered first. "The northeast scaffolding collapsed during our inspection. If Michael hadn't noticed the initial displacement, he left the implication hanging." "You saw it starting to fail?" Walter turned to his son. Michael dismissed the paramedic, pressing a bandage to his forehead. "A slight vibration in the support beam. Then a sound I recognized from that collapse in Hartford 10 years ago, the one you made me investigate as part of my education." The reference to Walter's hands-on training methods, often resented by Michael at the time, hung between them. "You remembered," Walter said softly. "I remembered everything you taught me, Dad," Michael replied, his voice equally quiet. "Even when I was fighting against you, I was using your lessons." The admission shifted something in the atmosphere between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the first foundation stone of a bridge across the chasm. Jacob, sensing the moment, excused himself to speak with the safety inspectors outside. Alone with his son, Walter took the seat opposite him. "The scaffolding shouldn't have failed. It was properly specified in the revised plans. It wasn't the design," Michael said, handing Walter a tablet displaying material analysis results. "The supplier substituted lower-grade components than what we ordered. The same supplier I originally contracted before the specifications were upgraded." Walter reviewed the data, anger rising. "They thought they could get away with the original delivery despite the changed order." "Exactly." Michael ran a hand through his dust-covered hair. "If we hadn't been personally inspecting, if this had happened during regular construction." The unspoken tragedy hung between them. People could have died. The Briggs name could have been forever associated with negligence and loss of life. "You were right," Michael said abruptly, the words appearing to cost him considerable effort. about the materials, about the corners that couldn't be cut. I still believe in modernization and efficiency, but not at the expense of safety. Walter studied his son's face, searching for the calculation he'd grown accustomed to seeing. Instead, he found something that looked remarkably like his own expression after his first major mistake in business, the humbled recognition that pride comes before destruction. "We both made mistakes, Michael," Walter acknowledged. "I should have listened to your ideas for modernization years ago. I should have seen your ambition as an asset to nurture, not a threat to contain." The admission seemed to surprise Michael. He stared at his father, perhaps searching for insincerity and finding none. "Mom would have known how to handle this better," Michael said. "She always understood both of us." "Yes, she did," Walter agreed. "Though I'm not sure she always made the right choices in how she managed our differences." A small smile touched Michael's lips. "You mean keeping secrets from both of us while trying to prevent exactly what ended up happening anyway?" The shared insight into Elizabeth's complex manipulations, however well-intentioned, created an unexpected moment of connection. "I never told you this," Walter said, "but your mother was the one who convinced me to promote you to project manager on the Burlington development 10 years ago. I thought you weren't ready. She insisted you would rise to the challenge." "And I did," Michael reminded him. "That project came in under budget and ahead of schedule." "Yes," Walter acknowledged. "You impressed me, though I'm not sure I ever told you so directly." 1 year to the day after the scaffolding collapse at West Shore, Walter stood on the rooftop terrace of the completed building, surrounded by Boston's elite gathered for the grand opening celebration. The evening air carried the crispness of early autumn, the harbor waters below reflecting the golden hour sunlight. At 66, Walter felt the weight of his years, but also a lightness that had been absent for much of his life. The past 12 months had been transformative, not the comfortable retirement he had once envisioned, but something more meaningful. The formal partnership with Michael had evolved with cautious optimism on both sides. Their complementary skills, Walter's deep construction knowledge and relationship building, Michael's technological innovation and efficiency systems, had proven more powerful together than in opposition. Briggs Construction had not only recovered from the scandal but emerged stronger, with new contracts and a reputation for being at the forefront of both quality and innovation. The Oversight Committee remained in place, now viewed as an industry-leading governance model rather than a punishment. Jacob Reynolds had established a comprehensive safety program that was being studied by competitors. Most surprisingly to Walter, he and Michael had begun hosting a monthly dinner, initially strained affairs focused on business matters, gradually evolving into genuine opportunities to rebuild their relationship. Across the terrace, Michael was engaged with the mayor and several prominent developers, his confident gestures and animated expression reflecting the passionate businessman he had always been. Walter watched his son with a mixture of pride and lingering melancholy for the years lost to their conflict. "He's a natural," Thomas Layton observed, following Walter's gaze as he offered a glass of champagne. "Always was. You just couldn't see it when you were standing in opposition." "Elizabeth saw it," Walter said quietly. "She understood him in ways I never could. Perhaps because they were more alike than I realized." The thought no longer carried the sting it once had. Elizabeth's manipulations, keeping secrets from him, preserving evidence against him, orchestrating financial salvation without his knowledge, had been painful to discover. But with time and perspective, Walter had come to understand her impossible position between two equally stubborn men, each convinced of his own rightness. The mayor approached the podium set up near the terrace edge, praising the West Shore development as a testament to Boston's future, built on the foundation of its past. The speech acknowledged the controversy that had surrounded the project, framing it as evidence of Briggs Construction's commitment to transparency and safety. Then Michael took the stage, his presence commanding immediate attention. "Thank you, Mayor Chen," Michael began. "West Shore represents more than just another addition to Boston's skyline. For Briggs Construction, its symbol. West Shore represents more than just another addition to Boston's skyline. For Briggs Construction, it symbolizes a turning point, a moment when we nearly lost our way, but instead found a new one." Michael's gaze found Walter in the crowd. "My father built this company on principles of quality, integrity, and craftsmanship. I brought new ideas about efficiency, sustainability, and technological integration. For a time, we saw these visions as incompatible." A murmur passed through the audience, many of whom had followed the public battle between father and son. "We were both wrong," Michael continued. "The near tragedy at this site taught us that neither approach was complete without the other. Today, Briggs Construction stands as proof that tradition and innovation aren't adversaries, but essential partners." He gestured toward Walter. "I'd like to invite my father to join me. This building exists because of his insistence on doing things right, even when it was difficult." The invitation caught Walter by surprise. As he made his way to the podium, the assembled crowd applauded with genuine warmth. "My father and I would like to make an announcement," Michael said. "Effective today, Briggs Construction is establishing the Elizabeth Briggs Foundation for Construction Safety and Innovation with an initial endowment of $50 million. This was new. They had discussed creating a memorial to Elizabeth, but nothing of this magnitude. The foundation will fund research and initiatives that bridge the gap between traditional construction excellence and cutting-edge innovation. It will be guided by my mother's favorite principle: the strongest structures are built on honest foundations. The phrase sent a jolt through Walter. He glanced at Michael, who met his gaze with a small nod, acknowledging the significance of the words. The reference not just to construction principles, but to the secrets that had nearly destroyed their family and company. "Would you like to add anything, Dad?" Michael asked quietly. Walter hadn't prepared remarks, but standing there, facing an audience that had witnessed both his humiliation and resurrection, he found words rising from a place of hard-won wisdom. "When I started Briggs Construction 42 years ago," he began, "I thought I was building a company. What I didn't understand until recently was that I was actually building a legacy, and that legacy isn't measured in contracts won or profits earned, but in lives touched and values transmitted." He glanced at his son. "My greatest project wasn't any building in this city, though I'm proud of them all. It was raising a son who had the courage to challenge me when I lost sight of what matters most, and the wisdom to find common ground when it seemed impossible." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations. Boston's business elite, sensing the genuine reconciliation, approached father and son together rather than separately. The West Shore development was praised for its innovative features and impeccable construction, a perfect synthesis of Michael's vision and Walter's standards. As the celebration wound down, Walter found himself alone at the terrace edge, looking out over the harbor. "Penny for your thoughts," Michael said, joining him at the railing. "Just reflecting," Walter replied, "on how differently this evening might have gone if we'd continued on our collision course." Michael nodded solemnly. "If the scaffolding hadn't collapsed when we were both there to see it, if Uncle Robert hadn't intervened when he did, if your mother hadn't left that letter," Walter added. They stood in companionable silence, each contemplating the narrow margin by which disaster had been averted, not just structural collapse, but the complete destruction of a family legacy. "I've been thinking about retirement," Walter said eventually. "Real retirement this time. The company is in good hands with you and the team we built." Michael studied his father's face. "Are you sure? The partnership is working well." "It is," Walter acknowledged. "But part of wisdom is knowing when to step aside. Not because you're pushed, but because it's time." Understanding dawned in Michael's eyes. "This is different from before. You're not being forced out. You're choosing to go." "Exactly," Walter nodded. "On my terms, with the company secure, and with pride in what will continue after I'm gone." Pride in his son, though he didn't say it directly. Some emotional walls still stood between them, being dismantled brick by brick. "I'd still want your counsel," Michael said. "Perhaps as a special advisor to the board. Quarterly meetings, major decisions." Walter smiled slightly. "I think I could manage that." As the last guest departed, father and son remained at the railing, watching the lights of Boston shine against the night sky. "She would have loved this view," Michael said softly. "Mom always said you could understand a city best from above. And from below," Walter added, remembering Elizabeth's insistence on walking construction sites, on understanding the foundations before admiring the facades. "She saw things the rest of us missed." Walter turned away from the view, taking in the elegant building that would stand as their joint achievement. The legacy he was leaving wasn't what he had imagined when building his empire. It was more complex, more human, marked by both triumph and failure, pride and humility. As he followed his son into the lobby, Walter Briggs knew it was a legacy he could finally embrace. Not perfect, but true. And in the end, that was enough.